Okay, so we are live now. Welcome to yet another Thalam Talks, a very interesting Thalam Talk, I would suggest. In the last couple of months of the lockdown, we had over 30 sessions and 45 photographers, including 5 student photographers, showcase their work on Thalam Talks. All these talks were held in Tamil. We consciously made the decision of showing Tamil Nadu photographers and their work, unseen works earlier. Now we felt it's time to, celebrate other photographers across India, other artists, other curators, personalities doing different works in different parts of the country. Today we have two very special, prominent personalities, Ram Rahman and Suresh Jayaram. Just to give an introduction to Ram Rahman is a photographer, artist, curator, designer, and an activist. He has shown his photographs in individual and group shows in India and around the world. Recently, his recent works shows include the one in Paris in 2017, Pompidou Centre, the Houston Fotofest 2018, the Chennai PhotoBiennale 2019, and then Bioscope Scenes from an Eventful Life, his own set of images in 2008 in New Delhi. Some of the shows Ram Rahman has curated are Delhi Building the Modern at Kiran Nadar Museum of Art 2017, Sunil Jana Vintage Photographs at NGMA 2015, and the Delhi Modern, the architectural photographs of Madan Mahtar in Delhi 2012. His photographs are in the collections of permanent collections of Museum of Modern Art, New York, the Pompidou Centre, Paris, the Metropolitan Museum, New York, the Devi Art Foundation, Delhi, and many private collections. Ram has been lecturing on various aspects of contemporary Indian photography in the last few years. He initially studied physics in MIT and then went on to complete a degree in graphic design from Yale University School of Art. Welcome on board, Ram, today. And then So Suresh Jayaram is our own Nama Bengaluru man. Suresh Jayaram is an artist, art historian, arts administrator. So he is a teacher, right? So he's the director, founder director of Visual Art Collective One Shanti Road Studio. It's an international artist residency and an alternate art space in Bangalore. He's currently involved in art practice, urban mapping, archiving, curating, and arts education. His keen interest is in environmental and urban development issues, and that influences his work. He, in fact, taught art history at the Karnataka CKP, the Karnataka Chitrakala Parishad. And then he went on to become the dean between 2005 and 2007. So he set up One Shanti Road Studio. It's an international residency program to connect artists and creative people from different parts of the world to Bangalore to create, collaborate, and have conversations across cultures. His alma mater includes CKP Bangalore and MS University, Baroda. In fact, very happy to have Suresh Jayaram. Even when we wanted to start Thalam many years back, we have to meet him and then take his wishes, ideas, all that. Thank you so much for having you, Suresh. So these two artists, eminent personalities, are going to be sharing different point of views of documenting our cities. Ram Rahman from Delhi and Suresh Jayaram from Bangalore. So what I'll do is, like, before we just start a session, we'll quickly play. I'll share my screen and play the Thalam video just to give a revamp of what we did and then what we've done and then what we're planning to do in the future. And then we'll leave it to Ram to take over.
स्टूल ले आओ। नहीं वो Zoom तुम्हें डाउनलोड करना पड़ेगा, यहीं बैठ के देखना।
Ram,
Yeah.
over to you.
Okay. Thank you, PV. And I'm very, very pleased to be on the Thalam platform this evening. I had actually come to Bangalore many years ago for the Red Frames, which is, I can't even remember how long ago.
2012.
From which time PV has promised me, yeah, he promised me a portrait shot of him by Selva, which I still have not received. And I'm waiting for that still. Today, I thought after PV spoke to me about this whole issue of documenting cities, I thought to make a small presentation which might have some, oh, is the internet unstable?
No, fine. We can hear. Fine, fine.
Are you getting me?
Yes.
Oops. Are you getting me?
Yes. Ram, go ahead.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, Ram.
Okay, because I thought my Wi-Fi went off again. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm going to start with sorry, just share my screen. Give me a few seconds. Okay, is that all right? So this is introduction to myself, and I'm at the gate of my apartment building, well, the apartment complex in Delhi. And this was an old colonial bungalow in which Lord Curzon had stayed in 1903. The only part of which remains is actually the gate. I'm actually situated in a very historic
I think Ram's internet was a little unstable, and then we just lost him. Let him log in back. I'll just quickly.
He's there again.
Is there again, Ram?
Yeah, I'm back.
Yes.
Sorry about that. I'm having issues with the Wi-Fi suddenly right in the middle of this. Anyway, to get back, this is the gate of my apartment complex, which is in a historic
Ram, we are not seeing your screen, Ram.
You're not seeing it?
Yeah.
No.
Please share the screen, yeah.
Okay, 1 second, get back. I think it went off air. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry about that. I'm having issues with the Wi-Fi in the house for some strange reason. Anyway, this is in Civil Lines in Delhi, and I'm right next to a historic site, which is Kashmiri Gate, which is the north gate of the old city of Delhi. And Kashmiri Gate was where the biggest battle happened in 1857 of the big rebellion, which the British called the Mutiny. So this is a shot of Kashmiri Gate, and I thought I would situate my talk in the middle of the site where I actually live. Many years ago, I had done a poster on the destruction of Delhi after 1857, after the British had gone uh, into the old city again through Kashmiri Gate. And this is old photographs and a map of the site and pictures of Bahadur Shah Zafar, a photograph on the left and a painting on the right, the last emperor. Oops. I'm sorry. I'm not sure if you're getting this. Hello?
Yeah.
You are?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a map of Old Delhi and showing a photograph by Felice Beato of the front of the Jama Masjid. About almost 1/3 of the city of Delhi was actually destroyed by the British after they entered the city in 1857. On the top, you see the photograph, and on the bottom, you see the cleared land between the old mosque and the fort. So, you know, Delhi has a long history of destruction, of invasion, of rebuilding. And I'm going to situate all my talk basically in that context. My father was an architect, modern architect, who graduated from MIT and came to Delhi in 1953. He was brought here by Jawaharlal Nehru. And this is a photograph of him showing Nehru the plans of Rabindra Bhavan, which was the big art center of the Lalit Kala Academy, Sangeet Natak Academy, and Sahitya Academy in the middle of Delhi. This picture is from 1961. And I'm going to show you some of the photographs that my father took, actually documenting the city as it was in the 1950s. This is near Qutub Minar on the edge of the city, and these are monuments which were scattered through the city at that time, and this is how they looked. That's my cousin on the left and my sister on the right. This is in Mehrauli. And this is the same site on the top as photographed last year by me. So just showing the kind of transformation that a city like Delhi, which had these medieval ruins, and what has happened to them over time. I've got very interested actually in looking at site and architecture through photography, but I'm very interested in the history and also how the politics and communal issues have shaped what happens to cities, not just in India, but around the world. These are some more pictures of that area, which is now completely built up. In the way in the back is where you'll see all the high rises in Gurgaon now. This is the tomb of Balban. This is near the Qutub. These arches are all gone now. These, you know, even in the 1950s, early 60s, there were still many ruins around the city which have fallen down or vanished. This was the kind of housing that my father was building in the 1950s, a huge push of housing under Jawaharlal Nehru. This is just 2-room, very simple government flats, which were built on a huge scale. My father was trained by Bauhaus architects, including Walter Gropius. And you can see the very simple modernist lines in these flats, which were quite cheaply built. These actually became very, very popular, and they were known as the Rahman type flats. These were built in the thousands, not just in Delhi, but across India by the public works departments. And this is photographed last year, where the Modi government now is demolishing much of the government housing in Delhi to build high rises and actually giving much of the government land now to private enterprises. So I've got interested in this whole politics of what is happening. These are institutional buildings which were designed and built by my father for the Public Works Department. He worked in the government his whole life. And these are all the new infrastructure that came up. This is mid-1950s, Controller and Auditor General building. Side view. These photographs, by the way, are by my father. He was a very, very good photographer. He used a Rolleiflex and photographed a lot of his own buildings. And on the left is the University Grants Commission building. On the right is the Controller Auditor General. So these were all the new buildings coming up after independence for the modern state. This is the Daktar Bhavan, which is still the headquarters of the Indian Postal Service. And that's my father showing the model to President Rajendra Prasad and also Jagjeevan Ram. These are all old congressmen who fought for our freedom and had become the president and ministers after independence. Now, why is this not happening? That's the building as it got built. This is 1958. This is the tomb of Maulana Azad in front of the Jama Masjid. These are my father's pictures. This is my father's picture. The other one was mine. This is mine. This is a modern Islamic tomb for a religious person. The Maulana was a Maulana, but also a great figure in the freedom movement and very close to Nehru and Gandhi. And also personal documentation, because, documenting the city is also documenting the culture, the lives, the cultural lives. This is Buckminster Fuller, the philosopher, architect, designer from America, and Joseph Stein, the American architect who lived most of his life in Delhi. And this is in the Delhi Zoo, designed by my father, by Rahman, in front of the old fort. This is the Delhi Zoo. This was Rabindra Bhavan, the cultural center. And these are my photographs of the Sheela Cinema, which my father built. And this is also a cultural landmark, because this was the first 70 mm cinema in India. And it was a very big thing when it opened in 1961. Nehru came, big senior members of the government came with him to see Hollywood films, because that time only the Hollywood films were shot in 70 mm. So that was a kind of, fairly conventional photography of buildings, of architectural photography. This is the World Health Organization building designed by Rahman, 1963. And this was demolished last year. I've got very interested in this whole issue of what is happening with demolishing a lot of the modernist architecture in Delhi by this government, partly which has become a kind of ideological issue, because they're in a sense very anti-modernist, but they also want to build these new buildings with their stamp on it. And in many ways wiping out the whole Nehruvian ethos, the memory of the Nehruvian ethos. And that's the WHO building, and the picture on the right is the demolished building, which I snuck through a gate. I had a loft in New York City, which was right, walking distance from the World Trade Center at the time. And I actually saw these buildings being built in 1970 when I visited New York. The architect, Yamasaki, was actually a friend of my father's. And of course, after 9/11, this is the picture on the left is a press photograph. On the right, the red building with the people standing in the window, that was my loft. old 1834 building which looked over the East River. But right behind that building, you can see the World Trade Centers. And that's at the moment that the building started to collapse. So in many ways, this affected me personally because the fish market moved from here. And because of that, I ended up losing that studio space in New York many years later. So this is an effect of, and this is my photograph of the burning buildings, which burned for 6 months. You see at the center, the bottom, the base of that tower, this terrible smell which went through the whole neighborhood. I had assembled a whole set of pictures of Delhi in 1997 for a exhibition which the curator and photographer Sunil Gupta had curated in London called Divine Facades. And this was this was actually after Ayodhya, and he had an idea of commissioning 3 Indian photographers, which was Abul Azad, myself, and Dinesh Khanna, to look at architecture through the prism of what had happened in Ayodhya. And I came up with this project on Delhi, looking primarily at the sites of old mosques. And I realized that every one of these mosques, there was a temple being built either right next to it or in the wall. And these temples were, becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And the claims were being made that these were all ancient temple sites. So I saw this as a site of potential future conflict, given what had happened in Ayodhya. And this is how I assembled it. So they were my black and white images with popular street posters of religious and historic sites, which were bought on the street, along with text. This was shown in New York at the Ronald Feldman Gallery, and later in Delhi, in the Sehmat show, Ways of Resisting, which Vivan Sundaram had curated. There were also these clocks on the wall, pendulum clocks, which had photographs of gateways from Ayodhya. So there was a direct reference to Ayodhya in this work. These are some of the images. This was the empty canopy by Edwin Lutyens, in which the statue of King George V used to stand. And that was removed in the late 1960s and taken to this remote park in the north of Delhi, not very far from where I am now. So this was looking at, re-looking at architecture, at symbol, at history. This is right opposite my gate. This is the Qudsiya Mosque, Qudsiya Bagh Mosque, which is one of the last of the Mughal monuments built in the 18th century, the last of the Mughal gardens. And this mosque was essentially taken over by Bangladeshi Muslims and is used now for namaz. And in front of this mosque, that was the mosque. In front of this mosque, this Baba landed up one day and started out with the Shivling right at the wall of the mosque on the main road. You see the mosque in the back behind the fence. And I watched how this whole temple evolved over time, starting from this. And this is how it is now. It's got air conditioners. There are many cars parked outside. There's a structure which is rising higher and higher, and all on public land. This is not private land, but you can't remove a temple from public land because of, religious issues it becomes. This was another site in Delhi at the Jantar Mantar when it was next to the monument where they still allowed protests many years ago. And this was a very interesting protest by Dalit Buddhist monks, neo-Buddhists, who had gathered here to protest to regain control of the Bodh Gaya temple in Bihar into their hands, into Buddhist hands. And this was at the site of the Jantar Mantar. There had been a storm and their whole tent had collapsed. So I had done a big documentation of this protest site linking it to Bodh Gaya back then. And these are two pictures of the Safdarjung Tomb Mosque. Again, one of the late Mughal monuments in Delhi. It's a very, very beautiful mosque. And strangely, this mosque was not a site of a kind of Hindu-Muslim divide, but it was actually a Shia-Sunni divide. Within the Muslim community, these two groups laid claim to this mosque, and on different days, different groups would come for namaz, and they had to actually get police protection to keep the two groups aside. So even within one religious community, there were these issues. And this last one is from the Purana Killa. Again, in the base of the Killa, this Baba built a Bhairon temple, which has become one of the biggest in Delhi. And it's right under the most beautiful mosque built by Sher Shah Suri, which is inside the Purana Killa. So this was done in 1997, but I see these I mean, so far, nothing has happened in any of these sites in terms of demolishing of those mosques or takeover of that land. But I still see this as something which is bound to happen. This is the demolition of other modernist buildings in Delhi. This is the Fiki building. One of the architects was Vanu Bhuta, the architect from Bombay. This was demolished last year. This is Joseph Stein's fantastic exhibition hall in the world, in the Pragati Maidan, the Trade Center. And that's the picture of it being demolished on the left and my picture of it on the right during the first India Art Fair. Stein was famous for these very complex roof structures. And this, of course, is the Hall of Nations designed by Raj Rewal, which was demolished 3 years ago. And I had led a big campaign to try and save this building. It was an incredible structure, both by its engineering and its architectural and conception of space and use of material. Unfortunately, the Modi government demolished it, and they're building this huge, horrendous building of no architectural merit at this point. Right next to that was the Nehru Pavilion, where the famous exhibition by Charles and Ray Eames on Jawaharlal Nehru had been housed. This was also demolished at the time that the Hall of Nations was demolished. And we have not been able to find out what happened to the exhibition, because this is a historic exhibition in exhibition design all over the world. And this exhibition was actually the beginning of the National Institute of Design in Ahmedabad. This was the project that led to the creation of the faculty of NID, because they all worked, at that time, the faculty and the students had worked on this exhibition. That is the site of this big new building coming up, which is where the Nehru Pavilion was. Completely different way of interacting with architecture. These were these portraits I had done of victims, survivors of the Gujarat riots in 2002, taken with the assistance of Tista Setalwad, who had been fighting for justice for these people for many years. And on the 10th anniversary of the killings, I had gone with her to the Gulbarg Society in Ahmedabad, upper middle class society, which had witnessed terrible destruction, damage, and huge deaths. Almost 70 people were killed and burned alive in these houses. And in memoriam, what I did was put these images of the survivors from many parts of Gujarat, including Gulbarg Society, inside the buildings as a permanent exhibition. So this was a very different way for me to interact with architecture and the remnants of architecture. These were some of the survivors. On the right is Rupaben Modi, who's actually a Parsi woman, the very famous story where her son, they never found him. She was in the home of Ehsan Jafri, and she survived because she went upstairs and they locked the women upstairs. And she still believes her son is alive. This is the home of Ehsan Jafri, who was a very senior Congress politician in Gujarat. He was killed alive. His wife was watching from the upper floor where they were locked in. And this case is still being fought in the courts. This is Salim Sandhi in another of the houses, and he's standing in the room where his son was slaughtered and burned alive. This is in Gulbarg in Gujarat. I thought it would be very interesting to see a few pictures from an absolutely remarkable book done by Ahmad Matar, who's a photographer from Saudi Arabia. And he did this, it's almost 600 pages, this book, edited by Catherine David, who's co-director of the Pompidou in Paris, which is how I got to know about this book, because she curated an exhibition that I was in a couple of years ago there. And what he did was document this unbelievable transformation of Makkah from a kind of medieval, small-scale city into this gigantic, sort of modern, consumerist religious site. And they're absolutely amazing photographs, because the Saudis have destroyed anything of any historic value which went back over hundreds of years. There were mud structures, there were structures from the Ottoman times. You see the scale on the left, you see the city of Makkah as it was, and on the right, you see these giant buildings being carved out of the earth. And this huge tower which has been built towering over the Kaaba. I have not been to Makkah myself. I have been to Medina. And that's pretty much the end of what I wanted to show, but I thought that we could, maybe from this lead into other discussions, and I hand over to Suresh.
Yep.
Great.
Ram,
Yeah.
wonderful. So we're going to request you to open your video. Yeah, I'll just ask you to open the video. Yeah.
Oh, start my video?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I don't actually have a video to show, but you can see me?
Yes. We can
good.
see you. We can see you. Yeah, yeah. Suresh?
Yeah, I don't have a presentation to make. One is I'm extremely sorry. I'm trying to put something else together, which I will show on a later date with TV. But I want to look at Ram's work as a documentation of a certain kind of a change that has happened, which is not only connected with Delhi, but also a change within his own identity of being a citizen of this country, and has been documenting Delhi for a very long time. I also see that in Ram's work, there's a very conscious effort to not only look at the changing landscape of Delhi of the past, but also what is happening in the present, which is a large-scale destruction of modern architectural buildings that have been part of Delhi's landscape post-independence. What I want to also ask Ram in this conversation, which I'm trying to have with him, is that other than yourself, what are the other documents that one can see to represent this whole the whole archive of representing Delhi or a particular city in general?
Well, Suresh, unfortunately, there's no real published archive. One of the most remarkable visual archives, photographic archives, is the work of Madan Mahata, the photographer from Delhi, who photographed starting in 1955. And his career was actually totally parallel to the young modernist architects who built New Delhi. The problem is that that work is not published in any book form as yet. I had done an exhibition of his work in 2013, I think, at Devika Daulat Singh's Photo Ink Gallery in Delhi, and we took that. I think it came to Bangalore. I'm sorry, to Bombay, to the National, to Max Muller, not the National Gallery. But other than that, there has been no real document other than the few lectures which I have done. There is a lecture that I did which is online on Nehru and the building of New Delhi, which you can, if you search, you put my name and Nehru down, it'll pop up on YouTube. But I'm also thinking of Bangalore, which has a very different history. Bangalore, of course, doesn't have the whole history of being destroyed over centuries by invasion, by when the Sultanate sultans had come, and then afterwards the Mughals, and then the British and their enormous destruction. Nadir Shah had invaded from Persia. So Bangalore doesn't quite have that history. I think even under Tipu's time, the big battle against Tipu was really in Srirangapatnam and not so much in his palace, etc., which was in Bangalore.
No, there is.
But I think I've watched the transformation of Bangalore. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just trying to tell you that there were a lot of transformations that we see. One is that there are a lot of colonial photographs of the city that are coming into light. And there have been a lot of albums which are being circulated, especially in a blog which is called Bygone Bangalore. You might have seen the blog, and it's a kind of a public archive, and many people have been posting images of the city, which is a kind of a reflection of what the city was at one particular time. But there are interesting anecdotes of each different buildings that have emerged from people and their own experiences and conversations they want to have. So this has become a kind of a public archive as such. But at the same time, we have many significant photographers that have represented the city who belong to my generation as such. One is Claire Arney, who's worked extensively on the city. There's also Mahesh Bhatt, who has done a book about Bangalore. And there are other younger artists who, some of them like Selva Prakash, Kop Shiva. There is also Mahesh Shantaram. There is also a couple of others, younger people like Samir Raichur, who have been representing the city and also seeing a lot of the same motives that you have addressed, change and conflict. And also this whole business about collapse, and I don't know what kind of recovery that is going to happen, because the recovery is something that is new, that is being presented by the government as their vision of what a city should look like. But I feel that there are many archives of the city which still have to go public. So one of the things that we are doing in Shanti Road is trying to collect a lot of photographs that represent the modern period of Bangalore, from probably the late 1800s to the whole of the 20th century. So this is an attempt to put a lot of photographers, whether they are press photographers or photographers who've been documenting the city privately together. And we'll also see how we could curate it together to also see how we could connect it with contemporary Bangalore as such.
Suresh, the thing that, I got very interested. I mean, of course, my practice started changing, particularly after the Ayodhya demolition. And I had been very involved, before that with the Safdar Hashmi Memorial Trust. and we had been working on these issues, confronting communal politics. But that having gone to Ayodhya, done that whole exhibition, which was called Hum Sab Ayodhya, which really looked at one city through many, many layers of history, of political history, of economic history, cultural history, including the history of architecture, the history of painting. And it suddenly gave me an insight into how we can look at our cities in a much more complicated way than, just passing through and making pictures of buildings. I got very interested in actually what was the history behind each site. And I think for a lot of the younger photographers who are watching, I think that's something that that they should really think about and photograph their own environments, because you only realize many years later when you see the change which happens, which is happening so quickly nowadays, that you look back and you realize that there's a cultural history, cultural importance for that kind of document, uh, which is actually, it's like writing history, but it's doing it through visual means.
I also want to mention, want to bring PV online, because PV has been documenting Bangalore for quite some time, and he's been focusing on the lakes of the city. He's also been focusing on the different vanishing water bodies. And I think he also has a big body of work where he's documenting heritage monuments, which are colonial or vernacular architecture. So PV, can you tell us what is your kind of work ethic and what are you trying to represent in your images?
Uh, Thanks, Suresh. One thing that inspired me was the Ram was mentioning, and you were also mentioning about youngsters documenting things. I was inspired by the work done by Intac. Intac, they have chapters across India, and there are a lot of work being done by them in terms of conservation, in terms of renovation, in terms of saving those heritage buildings. So I was inspired by their work, some of their walks. In fact, I've attended many of the walks where Suresh was part of, in Bangalore city, specific to not just the built heritage, but also on the cultural side of it. Uh, be it the Pete walks where we have this Karaga and things like that. So I've been involved in working with Team Intac in Bangalore, especially Meera Iyer and Arvind, Pankaj, and the team. So we documented a lot of these buildings, most of the heritage buildings, as various segments. Bangalore, if you think about Alsur as one segment, Intac came up with an idea of showcasing only Alsur, Namma Halasuru as one, idea, and then we shot images in and around Alsur. The same way, the cantonment towns like the Richardstown and Frasertown and Cooktown. This came up as an exhibition, and it went on to become an event for the World Heritage Day. Year after year, I think last almost from 2009, 10, 11 years, I've been doing work with Intac. Uh, that is one component of this. We brought up postcards, we brought up exhibitions in association with them. Uh, at the same time, recently, last year, 2019, Meera in fact came up with a book called Discovering Bengaluru, where even the images were used, curated images from archives, and also the modern images from the, from my set of images that I made. Apart from that, the same way, like you said, the lakes are again an interesting component because the water bodies keep on changing. There are a lot of lake heroes, the lake champions who are conserving these lakes. I was able to, even shoot the world famous Belandur Lake during the fire and the smoke and the whatever the foam that came out. So it was interesting to be part of documenting city because I live in the city, and I have a kind of work where I can't travel so much out of city to do a series of images. I felt it will be an interesting thing to shoot the city which I live in. So that was Thanks so much, Suresh, for this bringing this point.
I just want to call upon Selva Prakash. Selva, can you unmute yourself?
I'll just ask him to, yeah. Selva?
One sec. Yeah, Suresh.
Selva, I've been seeing your work from the time you started doing a lot of documentation. Some of it because you were working in timeout, but at the same time, you did a lot of projects together, which kind of represented a lot of migration issues. And you also did a larger project which talks about erosion, environmental issues, etc. But in terms of representing Bangalore, you also did a fantastic series of work which represents people who are selling things, or people who are, um, are daily wagers, or people who are marketing things on their own in the city market area, etc. Can you talk about these things, or if you have any images, can you share it?
Yeah, it's in the website. Of course, I can share the link of the body of work.
Okay.
And
I have seen
yeah,
it, but I don't know about the others.
of course. Sorry.
I have seen the works, but I don't know about.
Okay, the others. Okay, sure. I will share the work in
I had
the
shown a
chat.
lot of them, and the United Arts Fair. They were fantastic images. I remember them.
Yeah, thank you, Ram. Thank you for curating the show. And regarding Suresh question, yeah, we did a project on vanishing traders. It's basically people who goes and sells, milk and rangoli powder to door by door. After these apartment culture and these gated community, these vendors are not allowed inside. It's basically salespersons are not allowed inside. So that's slowly disappearing, specifically in the mega cities. And that also have a kind of, which talks about recycle and reuse and things like that. These are the traders, like say the milk wala comes and pick up a glass bottle outside your door and they pour the milk and then you reuse the bottle every day. There is no plastic. Or some of the stuffs you carry your own vessels and collect it, so there is no packaging also. If you look at from that perspective, these are the people who really work towards these reuse and recycle and things like that. So yeah, that's the series I did it. And we found some interesting people in Bangalore, from knife sharpener and rangoli powder seller, and even people carry the cinema posters on the back of their cycle, and then they roam around the city to show what cinema is happening in the city, which is almost disappeared now. And that's one of the image sold in United Art Fair. I think,
Yeah.
thanks Ram, actually. Yeah.
So, Selva, in your career as somebody who was a photographer for Time Out, I think you did a lot of projects which were documenting the city and its residents. Can you remember one project that really talks about this idea of conflict and change?
We did quite a lot related to that, and Jaydeep Viji is the editor who is always interested in documenting the cities and things like that. And one project, yeah, even we did one on the migrant again. Like it's not a migration, but the kind of a mode which we use. What are the different kind of a transport which we use it for migrating from one city to other cities, and depending on the economic classes, they use the different transport. So we did a series on that. And the other one, there is a photo essay we did. Bangalore is a garden city. When they widen the road, they chopped off many trees.
Yeah.
And the tree trunk don't have, or a stump don't have any commercial value. So they usually dump outside the city. So we did a photo series on the tree stumps, so which I photographed in the night using the light painting technique, which is one of the photography very technique thingy. But we use the technique to paint those tree stumps outside outskirt of the city. And PV was also part of one of the shoot, and we went around 12 in the night or 1 in the night or something, and trying to find out some tree stump outside Mysore Road, near Mysore Road University or something. And I hope, yeah, that's one of the series we did. And Time Out focused largely on such stories. Yeah, yeah.
I want to see if we can call Mohammad Mustafa online and quickly ask him about his photographs I've seen of Pondicherry. I think he's been repeatedly documenting Pondicherry. Mustafa, if you are there, can you come on the screen or unmute yourself?
Yes, sir. Yes, Suresh, sir. Thank you. Yeah. After your perspective in Pondicherry, so many times you advised me to look different. After that only I noticed Pondicherry totally different perspective. Maybe you have you have referred me the Golconda building, right? So after you point out that that is the first cement building in India. After you only suggested me, even I'm Pondicherry, I don't know that information. So many detail you advised me. So I'm just slowly documenting my city. Also, I really thank you for your so many helps, sir, to document our Pondicherry. I'm ready to interest to do many activities in Pondicherry because of your suggestions.
Now, what
Sir,
is something very special? What is
I
something
yes,
special that you documented? I think you documented a lot of interiors, right?
yeah, interiors. I didn't. I started interiors only the French people. I'm just started slowly to entering the French community homes because I am seeing so many disappearing people in Pondicherry day by day. The who are lived in the French time. So those houses only I'm just started entering to documenting. And same time, I'm seeing so many identity crises in Pondicherry. Who are the Pondicherrians? There's very nowadays in Pondicherry. So those are I'm taking my mind. I will definitely I will do some projects.
Suresh,
So, yeah,
just wanted to remind him about his thin eyes of Pondicherry that he is documenting.
yeah.
Maybe he can talk about that briefly if you want to talk.
Yeah, because because of the modernizations. This is a joint families are there. No, people not ready to keep that old vintage houses. Day by day, they're demolishing. They're building the beautiful building for a commercial purpose most of time. So they're not the thinna is slowly disappearing in Pondicherry. Every street there is so many thinna in Pondicherry now disappearing. Every month one thinna is they're removing. So people building because thinna buildings have only one floor, right? So people can't join giant family nowadays. They so I've started slowly documenting those houses.
Yeah, PV. I just wanted to add some one more thing. When Suresh was asking about these time out stories, and even I think those times I almost most of the time I will be in Shanti Road, and Suresh goes for Sunday morning walk into these morning bazaar, which largely sells these old stuff, and he really comes back with rare stuff or some antiques. So I told this to Jaydeep, and Jaydeep said we have to go for a walk with him, and then he can document what he picks up and things like that. But those days, it's just a story. But if you look at now, the whole Kea market area is changing, and glad we did the story. I don't know how long. Even the metro construction is happening there now, so the landscape is also changing. I don't know still how long that's going to be survived in the rapid change of town. Could you tell Suresh how important to document such things in a city? And because there are many young photographers are here, why it is important to document such things in your own city? And Ram, you can also add that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can tell you very shortly that wherever you are in whichever part of India, whether it's in Tamil Nadu or in Bangalore or some other part, I think it's very exciting to record what is happening around you. And there's a lot of change that keeps happening, not only in the landscape, but also with people who suddenly disappear. It could be professions, it could be also certain landscapes that are there. There's a large scale developmental things that are happening in different parts of our country. And one way to see is that to document it regularly and archive it. But how we are going to put it together is very important. Ram has many ideas as a curator. So it will be interesting to see how one could see it as a photo book, or you could see it as an exhibition about the conflict and change that one sees around you.
Okay, there's, while we were talking about this, I actually went to my Facebook, which has become like a kind of archive facility for me. And I pulled out this old photograph, which I'm sharing on the screen, PV.
We could
Can
see
you
that.
see it?
Yeah, we could see. Yeah.
It's the UB headquarters, which was designed by Romy Khosla in the 1980s, and a very, very interesting modern building, which I photographed for him many years ago. And this, this building didn't last for very long because it was pulled down by, what's his name, who's fighting it in London just now.
Vijay Mallya.
And that, Vijay Mallya. So here is a bit of Bangalore, which lost a modernist history also. And that terrible, building, which looks like a pseudo Empire State Building in New York, came up over there. So, it's very strange when you look at all these histories. And these were the few photographs that I managed to pull out for Romy back then. So even in Bangalore, but partly we're talking about buildings, we're talking a little bit about labor, etc. But the documentation of people and how they live in the city is also very, very crucial. And that's something that I've been, doing for a long time. And for some of your younger people, if they Google my name and Bioscope, which was the one book that I had done when I did this big show with Bodhi, which is primarily on Delhi, but it's really focused on the cultural and political life of the city, which is separate from, the physical infrastructure. But that's as important to document, those changes in history and changes. So, people do look at that. Bioscope, Ram Rahman, and it'll pop up. It's actually, the whole book is on PDF of it is on ISU.
I just shared the link, Ram, on the chat. So
great,
people can easily see it. Yeah.
But I thought that many people probably never saw this UB building.
Wonderful. So I have two questions in the chat window. First question from Anu John. He was asking, his mic is not working. So he's saying, what is the importance of considering city as a whole, as a museum? Is both of you can answer, or one of you can answer?
Yes, city. I don't think city is a museum because it's not static. It's constantly changing. So I think we only through documentation we realize it's this changing through history and through whatever BBMP laws or through what people want to represent. Like the current building which Ram showed of Romy Khosla, which is a very beautiful building, and what is there now is the UB City. And the JW Marriott, which is there. But like in Bangalore, there is this amnesia about even recent past. People forget everything. So there is necessary for us to remind people of even our immediate past, and also say that there are a lot of important historical monuments, like for example the George Oaks building or the Badami House, which is there opposite City Corporation. It no longer exists. But some of us do have documentations of this particular building, and it was a very beautiful Art Deco building. So I feel it is our responsibility to document these buildings that are part of our landscape, and also not only and also see the way the city is growing. So it is not a static museum, but it is a continuous process in which we constantly see city changing because of real estate, because of the will of politicians, or because people want change. They also want they want to occupy the most important real estate that they want to invest in. So the real estate mafia, the politicians, and individuals are responsible for this accelerated change which we see in cities today.
Ram, do
Yes,
you want to add anything to that?
yes, actually, you know, as Suresh was saying, that the city is a living organism. And for instance, in Delhi just now, we're going through this huge debate on the rebuilding of the Central Vista, which is the heart you know, which is the symbol of modern democratic India, even though it was built initially by the British to be an imperial ruling ensemble, urban ensemble. But the whole idea of demolishing the buildings which were built in the 1950s, the government buildings, and you know, putting this very fascist uni-design blocks, huge blocks up and down the Rajpath on the two sides of India Gate, become a massive debate, especially now during this whole crisis that we're facing of this health crisis with this virus. And, you know, the lack of money which is being put into this, I mean, no money is actually being poured into this crisis of the rural migration, which is happening from our cities. So I think, you know, these are living debates. And what Suresh was talking about, like an Art Deco building, you see, many of these buildings are actually part of our cultural heritage. They're part of our cultural patrimony. And some of them may not be great buildings, but you know, they're buildings that you have lived with, they're buildings that you have grown up with. There's a kind of familiarity with the city, which is, you know, you build a kind of affection to parts of the city, which may even be ugly parts. But that is the whole nature of urbanism and nature of the city. And that's something very important to realize, that you can't just wipe out, uh, you know, entire sections of a city like they're doing in Banaras just now, which is again the same architect and being done by Modi, where they've torn down, you know, huge part of the old city from the riverfront to past the Gyan Vapi Mosque to the temple, and that completely destroys that organic nature and the history of the city. And it's very important that, you know, that these be preserved and not completely wiped out.
Ram, as you were talking about the Central Vista, I'm suddenly reminded of the Lal Bagh in Bangalore, which
Yeah.
Suresh is, you know, it's his forte, the Kote, this one, right? So Suresh is also working on this Lal Bagh thing. Suresh, you want to mention anything about the Lal Bagh in the city?
So I just want to say that in Lal Bagh there were certain heritage buildings. One of them was a Krumbigal Hall. So it was crumbling and it urgently needed repair. But despite Intact trying to intervene and protect it or try to revamp it, etc., there was no support by, I think, the government or will by the horticulture department to keep it intact. But one fine day, I think they demolished this building, not even retaining parts of it were very beautiful. It could be museumized, but they're building a new kind of a structure there. So this one part of history suddenly disappears. So I feel there is no policy, heritage policy. So despite despite intact being there, sometimes it needs more power or will, and also it needs more clause to take charge of heritage around us, whether it's colonial or modern, etc. But I also feel that it is our onus to invest in the idea of archiving the city, putting it together, and also showing people how the city has grown. So it is it will be valuable if our photographers can come together and kind of collate our images about the city, like the project I was trying to talk about. So I think I will be speaking to PV, Selva, Claire, and others who already documented the city, and I'll put a small series or presentation together, which I will share on a later date, and hopefully see how we can look at different aspects of documenting the city. Ram has got a new image. The Humayun's
Yeah, no, it's just, I just suddenly, I'm pulling this off my Facebook as we're talking live. Um, PV, you talked about Intac, and
Yeah.
one of the projects that I've been doing in Delhi for many years, in fact, one of the few jobs that I have, which is a fantastic project, is documenting the restoration of the Humayun's tomb and the whole Nizamuddin complex by the Aga Khan Foundation Culture, which Ratish Nanda, the restoration architect, is managing. And this is an image shot last year or 2 years ago now, when they had lit the tomb again at night. Now, the interesting thing for me is that here you are restoring a Mughal monument with great care and over many, 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 many years. Uh, you know, going back to the materials that were used initially, to the stone that was used, to the remaking the tiles. On one hand, you're doing this, which is a fantastic thing, because this is, preserving a great, great piece of architecture. But I do think that this is the most stunning Mughal building of all. It's way, way better than the Taj Mahal any day. But and on the other hand, modernist architecture, which is actually equally important, because it's a symbol of a kind of aspiration of the newly independent India, and a kind of vision for the kind of society, this egalitarian society, socialist ideals that we were looking towards. And it was also a signal to the rest of the world, which was coming out of colonial rule. That modern architecture was equally important, as important as this beautiful Humayun's tomb. And that, unfortunately, we are destroying. So, there's this strange irony, and in funny ways, I've been photographing both ends, the destructive end and the reconstructive end.
So there's one question from Vasan. He was asking about, he said his mic is not working. So he wrote it down saying, first time I get to hear Ram, and it's been a revelation. History is fascinating, and Ram's anecdotal presentation captured through photographs has been a journey, right? So he's asking one point of view: unlike historical structures from centuries that have stood the test of time, structures of today seem to be more transient and driven by political or religious sentiments. What structures of the late 20th century or the 21st century would you believe would be considered heritage 100 years from now?
Well, I would say that, the Hall of Nations, which we talked about, was a hugely important modernist structure, which was regarded actually all over the world. I'll try and see if there's image of it that I can discover somewhere. It was, very radical in its concept, as I said, both architecturally and engineering wise. Hold on, let me see. I think I do have it here somewhere. Done in 1972. The architect was Raj Rewal, and the engineer, who just turned 95, he's still very much with us, Mahinder Raj, was one of the most brilliant engineers in concrete anywhere in the world. And, you know, that structure was built with very limited resources. We were still coming out. It was 25 years after independence. There was not a lot of money to build. This was a very symbolic structure because it was built for a trade fair. So in a way, it was, you know, I mean, talking about this whole stupid speech on Atmanirbhar in the last week. I mean, this is something we went through in the 1950s. You know, we came out of colonial rule by being self-reliant. And that building symbolized that. And it was, you know, literally hand-built by illiterate labor, but it was an extremely complex piece of structure engineering-wise. And when you see the construction pictures and the laborers who built it, it's the most astonishing thing. You know, I call it almost like a handloom building, but a high-tech handloom building, because it was literally hand-built, but a structure which had a you know, concept of the future, of an aspiration, of ambition, of modernity, of new use. And, you know, I mean, there are a number of buildings. Luckily, you know, Delhi had an incredible modernist architecture streak after independence. And there was all this open land in Delhi to build, unlike in cities like Bombay and Calcutta, which were urban, you know, big urban centers which had been built by the British. Delhi had all this. I showed you those early pictures of my father of Mehrauli, where there was completely barren land with these monuments scattered all over. So that tradition of Delhi's modernist architecture is actually one of the great cultural treasures of modernist architecture anywhere in the world. And sadly, it is now being recognized just as we're beginning to tear it all down. Museum Modern Art is doing a huge show next year on modern architecture of India and South Asia. And, you know, tragically, many of the buildings that they were going to show and are showing will no longer exist.
Okay, there is one technical question, Ram. I will ask if about the, you know, because you've been shooting for a really long time.
Yeah.
Prabhu Kalidas, you're there, Prabhu?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Prabhu, go ahead.
Sir, hello, sir. Suresh, sir.
Yeah, hi.
Sir, can you help me with this thing, sir? Like, how come you manage while shooting on these kind of tough kind of documentaries, sir? Like people including these kind of stuffs, right? It will be helpful for us to manage in the future, sir. Whenever we do certain documentaries.
I can't hear you very clearly. Can you repeat that?
Sir, hello.
Can you repeat?
Yeah. Just come closer to the mic. Maybe I can't hear you clearly.
Sir, my internet connection is so low, sir. So that I have typed the question. PV will help.
Okay. Yeah, type it or speak it now. I can hear you now.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you
Okay,
now.
I will just see if I can pull out.
Yes, sir. Sir, I was seeing that images, that portraits of the Godra incidents portrait series at displayed at one place, sir.
Right.
I just want to know that people will include while you are doing these kind of shoots, right? Again, this kind of riots, this thing and all. So
right.
I just want to know. I'm so curious. Like, how did you manage to save your film roll shot that time? And it will be really helpful for us to manage in our future projects, sir.
Is the question about shooting on film and how does one save that now?
No, sir.
There are two questions. Prabhu, can I just read your question. So can I just repeat that?
Yeah, please.
Ram, there are two questions. One, he's saying all all these were shot in the film, right? That is one thing. And then during riots and all these other problems, how you manage to save them, manage yourself to save them, from the problem creators.
Oh, well, you see actually, some of these are actually digital. They're not all film. Some of them are shot after digital has come in. But, none of these are shot actually during violence. The only time that I shot, which is not the kind of normal, the photojournalist kind of work, because I don't do that kind of photography. The only time I did that was when I shot the survivors of the 1984 Sikh riots in Delhi, which I had shot on black and white Tri-X film across the Jamuna. The pictures that you're talking about, the victims of Gujarat, those were actually people that we had brought secretly from the camps in Ahmedabad to Delhi to actually meet the press and to meet MPs, and I took them to meet the president, K.R. Narayanan at that time. Funnily, I was shooting Rashtrapati Bhavan at that time, so I had an in with K.R. Narayanan, and he asked me to bring these victims to meet him because he wanted to hear their stories. In fact, after that meeting, he issued the first statement against the Gujarat riots at that time, because the BJP was in power then, you remember, and he was president, so he was very careful about his role at that time. But after that meeting, so those portraits, I did because I got to know these people. I was dealing with them on a daily basis, and I just made these portraits, not knowing what I would do with them. I just thought, okay, let me just document these people. And many years later, when this memorial was being done by Tista in Gulbarg, and I had gone there, it suddenly struck me that, okay, this is what I can do, is make these small little prints and just, in a sense, get the survivors to take over those ruined buildings. And for me, it was actually, one of the most important exhibitions that I've ever done, because it was seen by the families of survivors. And to me, it was a different way of making a statement, of getting work out, and being involved in whatever way I could, in some sort of memorializing, but also maybe some sort of cathartic relief for all these people who never got justice. So it is a mix of digital, and that the picture I showed you of Romi's building was actually a film picture. It was shot on film on a Sinar view camera that was Fuji, and that was scanned. It was scanned not very long ago. I found these slides after many, many years. So it's a mix, one, that picture that you saw of Humayun's tomb at night actually is a digital photograph done on a Fuji medium format. Digital camera. It was one of the first, I had just bought the camera. It was one of the first pictures I made. And I was stunned at how the sensor of that camera managed to catch so much detail in both the highlight and in the shadow. So, these technical things one learns, but one keeps in the background, because you're ultimately you're looking at what is the image that you want to capture. And that's part of, why I'm so interested in history, because it's in the back of my head all the time. Even if I'm looking at Humayun's tomb, I know the whole history of the building, and I know the history of the architect, and how many years it took to build. So that in a sense that comes into the work that you do, because there's an information that you have behind you, and it helps you to look at the world around you. I think, at least for me, it does. It helps me to look at the world around me and put it in a kind of context.
Just to add Prabhu's question, Ram, as I've been seeing your Facebook posts, sometimes you post a picture of Sasi Tharoor in a party, and then you post a picture of your mother, who was the first Miss World contestant from India. You know, I'm sure like you've been shooting for a long time. At the same time, you are archiving it very, very disciplined manner, and you keep posting it. I think that's the one of the question I think, Prabhu, is when you shoot on a film, how you are preserving and documenting. And could you, share your working style or flow or something? Yeah.
Yeah, working flow. Well, maybe what I'll do is I'll walk you through the state of my living room right now.
Please do. Yeah.
If you want to see what archiving is,
Yeah, please.
PV, put it on the big screen.
Yes, you're already on the big screen.
Okay. Because here, you see, during the lockdown, I thought, okay, let me pull out.
Oof.
This is the state of my lockdown. And every day I'm finding this is my father's archive. These are New York pictures down here. So if you think that any of this is like highly efficient, you're sorely mistaken. This is a giant mess. And every day, the thing with Facebook and how I've ended up using it is, when I open a box of slides, I will quickly scan it or look through and I find some image and I scan it and I throw it out on Facebook immediately. And in a sense, Facebook has become a kind of, as I said, an archiving. And that's how I found the UB picture of Romy on my Facebook site while we were talking. I find actually,
Thank you so much.
we can talk about, maybe an aspect of using the net as a means of communication. Because what you're talking about, for me, posting a picture of Shashi Tharoor at a party in my loft or something. These are things that I find, and what I do now is I take my iPhone and quickly, make a copy of the print, or I use a portable light box. I have a lovely digital portable light box, and I put a negative or a slide on that, and I copy it with the iPhone. I don't even scan it, and I throw it out on Facebook. In fact, Catherine David, who edited that book of Ahmad Matar, the Saudi photographer, Catherine is like this hugely important curator from France and the co-director of the Pompidou Museum. When she first met me, I didn't really know very much about her. And, she came to look at my work and I asked her, I said that, what are you doing now? And she said, well, I'm at the museum. And I said, which museum? And she looked at me and she said, the Pompidou. She knew I knew nothing about her, and she just started to laugh. And she said to me then, she said that I have been told that you have a very major art practice on Facebook. And I almost fell off the chair. I said, who told you that? And she said, I won't tell you. And, I had never thought of my Facebook like that, but actually, in a way, some of these platforms are a way of publishing. And for instance, the kind of talk that you're doing now, the Zoom talk or Facebook Live talks, is a way of actually sharing not just experience, but also a little bit of work. And I think in the modern world, especially now with the coronavirus, as we get physically more and more isolated, this is one way of getting work out there. So, my thing is completely random. It's not organized at all, as you have seen.
Wonderful. Ram, I just wanted to bring in, there's one curator from, this is an art teacher from Paris, Estelle Awonima. So I'm just going to bring up if she's saying something connecting to her art practice in Africa and India. Let me just unmute her if she want to add. Hello?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. So I've asked you also to open up your video if that is possible. Otherwise, we'll listen to your voice.
Okay.
Estelle, hi Estelle.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that your discussions was very informative, because I am I'm talking with photographers in Africa about the problem of heritage as well.
Okay.
More specifically with Boubacar Mandemori, who is a photographer who has extensively documented a town called Rufisque in Senegal, which is dating from the Portuguese period, which is about 15th century, 16th centuries. And this town is completely now, I mean, the ancient houses are totally now neglected. And so some photographers have done a very important survey to show to try and tell the politicians that they had to do something to save, to preserve this heritage. But I was surprised that when they don't pay attention to this heritage, they spend a fortune with a museum, a national museum they just built, made by Chinese. And it has, it's a big investment, but it's also a big debt, a very big debt for the country.
Right.
And so there is a sort of for me, a gap between the choices made. On one hand, not preserving the heritage. On the other hand, using an architecture which is made and conceived somewhere else than the country.
Yeah, these are issues I think that many of us deal with. And, sadly, when we first became independent, after 1947 in the 50s, there was a political and a cultural vision which was rooted in our local situation, both in material terms and in cultural terms. So the whole, there's this long story of how those office buildings, which were like plain Bauhaus buildings, built very quickly for the bureaucracy, the new bureaucracy. They were very basic buildings, but done with a certain aesthetic, modernist eye. And it's the Rabindra Bhavan, the cultural complex in memory of Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore, where Nehru actually forced my father into making a building which had a cultural root in its design vocabulary, which was not pastiche. And that's what ended up the Rabindra Bhavan being like. Let me see if I can find some of those pictures again. Go back to the PowerPoint. But I think, this whole issue that you see, partly what happened in Delhi, there was a proposal in Delhi to get a UNESCO World Heritage Site designation, which this government withdrew a number of years ago. And now we realize why they withdrew it, because of this whole idea of rebuilding the Central Vista and other parts of Delhi and tearing down all these modernist buildings. They wanted a free hand. They didn't want a UNESCO World Heritage designation to limit grabbing land which was very valuable. PV is not, oops, sorry, not from.
You were looking for that image you said, Ram.
Yeah, I'm just looking for that, and I'll just put the share screen again. Hold on. Let me get to share screen. Okay, just now one is getting used to this. You see, for instance, this building, this was, play from current slide. All right, this was the tomb of Maulana Azad, and this was done 1958. Now, this was using the arch of the Mughal mosque in the back, the proportion of the arch, but built in a very thin shelled concrete structure, which was a completely modern use of material and modern concept, but using a Mughal jali at the base around the tomb. And it's only recently that an American researcher has discovered in the National Archives in India that there was a huge debate by the ulema in the old city, saying that this was too radical, this was too modernist, and they wanted a more traditional tomb for the Maulana, who was also a religious leader, besides being a political leader and an educationist. And it was, Nehru put his foot down and said, no, this is perfect. This is exactly the modern India. And I think partly, you had modernist architecture in Africa also. You, of course, are talking about a colonial heritage, which is being lost, which is also very sad because that is part of the history of Africa too.
Yes, sure.
And, for instance, we didn't destroy the British colonial in India. We may have removed some statues or changed some names, but we didn't destroy the buildings. And this is the building that I was talking about. This was the building that became the kind of symbol for the, for the new modernist vision. And this was a cultural center, which is why this Nehru forced my father into, thinking differently from those office buildings. And he made him refer back to the tomb of Maulana Azad. And in fact, the very first building, which I didn't show in this talk, it was from Calcutta, which was the tomb of, not a tomb, but the first memorial to Gandhi after his assassination in 1948. The Gandhi Ghat, which is a very famous structure, simple structure. But these are issues that we have all, I think different cultures have, certainly in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, really dealt with. And sadly, we are, destroying this heritage now.
Beautiful.
Wonderful. Thanks, Estelle and Ram, for that. One last question we have, and then we'll move to the closures. Ramesh, Ramesh, you there? Ramesh?
Ramesh has vanished.
Please unmute yourself, Ramesh.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Here.
Yeah.
Ram, thanks, sir. It's a great presentation. I have two questions. One is, the first one is, you stand in front of architecture and you are going to freeze that point of time with that particular building. So
Right.
what angle you will choose? Because it's going to be a story, and there can be a building can be shot at anyways, like inside, outside, with people, without people, in the day, in the night. Anything
Right.
can be done with that architecture because it is not people. It is just
It's sitting there. It's not moving.
Yeah. So how you decide your angle? Okay, I'm doing this, and there is one photo which is going to be a story, and where and how I will take that picture.
Well, that's you'll have to pay me a huge amount of money to take a class in architectural photography. No, I'm joking. That's something actually that you pick up over time. You see, my advantage is my father was an architect, and I grew up in the midst of architects and in the discussion. I mean, my mother was a dancer, so one discussion would be on classical dance and Bharatanatyam and Kuchipudi, etc. on one hand. And then on the other side of the table, you would be discussing modern architecture. And should you use a jali or should you not use a jali? Should you use brick? Should you use, granite? So I had an advantage with the discussion of this kind, and also growing up knowing all these architects who became very major architects. The, so in a sense, you have to learn how to look at a building and architecture and see what's interesting about the building, even if you're making a picture without people. And one of the things with Madan Mahata, the great photographer from Delhi, is that he had an incredible eye. He's one of the great architectural photographers in the world. He just knew, where to place his camera. And one of the things is, don't make a flat picture. Don't make a building which is just a facade. It's much more interesting to get an idea of depth, of volume, of light and shade. And I like shooting pictures which don't have a lot of contrast, so that they are filled with information. So you can see what is happening in the background, you can see what's happening in the shadow, you can see the material that is being used to build the building, and very often, have a foreground element of the building which relates to the background. So you're getting a sense of the space that the architect is making or has made. Of course, that one picture of Humayun's tomb is a very flat picture. That's a sort of dramatic picture to show the lighting. So that doesn't give you, I mean, the fountain is there in the front, but it doesn't give you a real, it gives you a sense of the site, but that's a distant shot. Now, you see, now the thing that I find it interesting is that you can make a very ordinary architectural photograph. I mean, like a plain picture of a building. But what I got interested in is when you put that picture in a different context. For instance, I shot Moshe Safdie's Khalsa Heritage Center for him, for the architect. He's an Israeli architect who's based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Very, very, very big name. And I shot his building over 4 years while it was being built in Anandpur Sahib outside Chandigarh. And it's a very modernist building. I'll see if I can find some of that in the next few seconds. But I put my Sikh riot victims in the context of that building, because I connected, the Khalsa Center was a modern building built to extol the virtues of the Sikh community, of the Sikh religion, Sikh philosophy, and it was built many years after that terrible, the incidents which had happened. First of all, the rebellion and violence in Punjab with the Khalistanis, the assault on the Golden Temple, and then the assassination of Indira Gandhi and the subsequent riots on innocent Sikhs, particularly in Delhi, which I happened to photograph the aftermath. So for me, that putting that modern building in context of the Sikh riots, for me made sense, because I saw that building as a kind of reassertion of Sikh pride and a claim to a kind of Sikh, identity and strength of their cultural resilience in the aftermath of what had happened in 1984. So I find that interesting, that you can, how you can take a picture which you have been made in a completely different context, but put it in a different historic or political or cultural context, and the reading of the picture becomes very different.
Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot, sir. And one more question. When you were shooting architectures, and Delhi is always a fascinating place with destruction and modernization at the same time. And if you look at Indian architecture photography, it was very scenery, because we have a mixture of Dravidian, Persian, Portugal, French architectures. But if you see
Yeah.
the recent, if you see the recent times, the structures, whether it is in a city or a big town or India or any other country, they looks very same. So do you see, is this observation correct? Do you still see, for architecture photography, the future, what would be the future, because of this dryness of mixing of architecture?
Well, mixing in some way, you can say, actually reflects democracy. And that's, one of the objections I have to the Central Vista project is it's actually a fascist project because it's putting the same block of buildings, 8, 9 buildings down one vista. And the buildings we have there, some of them may not be great buildings, but for me, they're a reflection of the democratic process that we went through. And for me, that's rich because it may be a bad building, but it's got, it reflects your culture in a positive way. For instance, when I went to Morocco many years ago, I did a book on the architecture and gardens of Morocco. I was shocked at the medieval cities of Morocco because they were so clean. I live on the edge of Old Delhi, and if you walk into the gullies of Old Delhi and you walk into Fez or Marrakesh in Morocco, you'll be shocked because there's not a poster on the wall, there's no, dirt on the street, there's no electric wires hanging. But in 3 minutes, I realized that what I was seeing in Morocco actually was a reflection of a completely controlled society. And it was not a democratic society. So you've got a double edge. Physically, it looks very beautiful, but then you realize the underlying reasons for that. It's like, China. You cannot open your voice in China. China, of course, sadly has destroyed much of its older architecture. And much of old Beijing, etc., is gone, other than, the imperial city. But you realize that that kind of perfect preservation of a city actually reflects a political system which is totally controlled. And there is no democracy there. No one will be able to speak against, the ruling establishment, etc. So in some ways, I see the chaos. And I saw this when I went for the Gwangju Biennale in Korea also. You see these apartment buildings in Korea which are totally identical, and they're all the same height, and they all have huge numbers on the side which identify the building. And it's actually frightening to see. And I suddenly thought that I would never have thought that I would, think that, oh, thank God Gurgaon is such a mess, the modern city of Gurgaon, because it is democratic, and that mess in some way reflects that chaos of democracy. So in some ways, I was relieved to see the mess of Gurgaon after coming from Korea, because the idea of living in a place like Korea with those, buildings completely identical, with even the light, even the green tube lights in all the windows were all identical. And you see this in the hundreds from outside these buildings. So, in some ways, I think photography is just going to reflect your current. You cannot wish a building into being created. You basically have to react to what you see, and I think you can react both with a sort of idealistic, fine, major building, and also mess. I took a lot of pictures in Ernakulam and in Kerala, looking at this mess, and I found it actually quite fascinating. And they are architectural pictures, but they're architecture of absolute chaos, which is wonderful in its own way.
Wonderful.
Thanks, sir. It's democracy is not important in just in politics, but in art also, right? So it won't be flat. Life will not be flat in any perspective. Thanks, sir.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So thanks, Kadir. And so that comes to the end of this session. So it's a very fascinating way to listen to Ram and Suresh. I must thank both of them. I still remember this 2012 when we wanted to call Ram, and when I met Suresh, over the phone call, we kind of discussed, and connecting the dots happened, and Ram was flown down to Bangalore for the event. The same way, this time when we wanted to have this session documenting our cities, we were able to put this together amazingly well, where Ram sharing the images from Delhi and Suresh adding a lot of point of views from Bangalore. It worked out well. I'm sure all the participants will start seeing the Delhi with a different point of view, different perspective after seeing Ram's images since whatever he shot in 1950s and 60s. And everybody remembered the Pragati Maidan, the Hall of Nations, very interesting thing. Thank you so much again, Ram and Suresh, for agreeing to do this. And thanks for all the participants coming in to this session. And Selva and other panelists who were there in the earlier sessions. Thanks again. Good night, I would say. If there's anything else that you have to,
PV.
yeah.
And PV, I'm waiting for that photographer now.
That
Yeah.
picture.
Sure, I'll make sure he
I'm
sends
not publicizing it, but I'm waiting for that picture.
Okay.
Yeah, Selva and I know, and Suresh and Ram also know now. We'll move on.
Okay, bye everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Suresh.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Suresh.
Thanks.
Bye, Ram.
Selva, do the picture.
Sure, sure. Waiting for the lungi to come.
Okay.
Estelle, merci
okay.
Estelle, pour joindre.
Bye bye.